so much of the root of why I started Wellness with Edie, because I was seeing online, in order to be healthy, you need to take XYZ supplements, and you need to add all of these special adaptogens and powders to your smoothie in order to be healthy. And at the root of it, it's so much simpler than that. But the problem is that diet culture sells, diets sell, and people jump on that bandwagon because they're promised you'll lose 10 pounds and you will feel so much more vibrant and energized. And maybe you do, but did you actually learn certain habits and behaviors that are practical and sustainable moving forward?
Let's rewind. Let's take it all the way back. So this is what we know so far. You are living in Denver now. You're born and raised in the Bay Area, and you have been a nutritional health coach. That's what you do. And you started this experience or went down this path with CGM and started to unlock. It's interesting because it often happens with people who are surrounded in health and wellness or work in health and wellness, where it's almost like, how could I not have known this before? It's all this like new information coming in. So why don't we rewind all the way back to where you're from, what life was like before getting into health and wellness, and what the catalyst was for to start exploring that. And we'll take it forward into your levels journey.
Absolutely, Ben. So I, like you said, born and raised in the Bay Area. I ended up out in Colorado for college. But in terms of my childhood and my relationship with food and exercise, we pretty much ate the standard American diet. My parents did the best that they could with the knowledge that they had at the time. But in addition to eating home cooked meals, we were also eating Toll House cookies and getting takeout pizza. And I had a very normal relationship with food. And when I say that, it wasn't really anything that I spent meticulous time thinking about. When my parents talked about food, they would say things like, broccoli is a vegetable, and we don't necessarily eat ice cream every night, but there was never this conversation about these foods are good and these foods are bad. It was never black and white like that, which I appreciate, so much, because I think it kept me naive for a long time. And in terms of playing sports, I loved to play sports, but it was never about molding my body into a particular shape or burning calories or anything like that. It was all about being active and learning good sportsmanship and being with friends and socializing and all of that. So just like my relationship with food was very normal growing up, so was my relationship with exercise. Fast forward to college, and I found healthy living blogs, which I'll put that in air quotes because a lot of these blogs that I found circa 2008, 2009 were talking about eating low carb and cutting out certain macronutrients and watching your fat intake. And I read all of that and pretty much believed it in a very black and white mindset. Simultaneously, I went through a breakup and essentially turned to food and exercise as my coping mechanisms. So, by definition, I was very orthorexic. I essentially cut out a lot of food groups. I was very careful about the food that I was putting in my body, and I was also over exercising. So I lost body weight very quickly. I, at the time, was on birth control. So all of these, it's very interesting to go back and think about all of these different factors and lifestyle habits, because I pretty much was like lighting the fuel for the blood sugar imbalance fire in many ways without realizing that that's what I was doing. I eventually recovered from my eating disorder, found a much more balanced approach to nutrition and exercise. I met my husband, who has always had a very normal relationship with food and helped me really get over that hump of eating a very clean lifestyle to actually being able to eat pasta and pizza and have dessert and not feel guilt about it. Right around this time, though, that I had recovered, we got married and I went off of birth control, and I didn't have a menstrual cycle for over 2 years. And I went to the doctor, and very long story short, I was diagnosed with PCOS, which we know is a reproductive disorder, but it's also in many ways a manifestation of an underlying metabolic issue. I didn't know it at the time. I was just starting to dip my toes in the water in terms of holistic health and nutrition and integrative nutrition, but I didn't understand fully what my PCOS diagnosis meant. I now know that it's super common and that you need to balance your blood sugar. And there's so many different lifestyle things that you can do to help alleviate some of your PCOS symptoms. Or actually, in my case, I was able to fully put it into remission. So it was just this like perfect storm of different experiences and my PCOS diagnosis that all kind of came to a head. And I was working in tech at the time. This was in my early 20s. And I realized I was very burned out, wasn't passionate about what I was doing. All of my free time was spent trying to understand female hormones and how to holistically heal from PCOS. And in many ways, that was the catalyst for me to go back to school. So I went back to school. I graduated from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, became a integrative nutrition health coach, and ended up leaving my tech job. I thought I was going to get into corporate wellness, keep my stable salary, my health benefits, but I ended up taking the leap, started wellness with Edie, and have truly never looked back. Now, my road to entrepreneurship hasn't been linear by any means. It's had a lot of twists and turns, but at this point, I feel so aligned in terms of the work that I'm doing. I am health coaching. I write wellness content. I partner with brands to create content. And the premise of all of that is to teach women how to balance their hormones and how to understand their blood sugar. Because for me, it's been an absolute game changer. Like I said, I was able to put my PCOS into remission, and I truly credit understanding my blood sugar to that. And obviously, wearing a continuous glucose monitor has just taken that to the next level.
So much interesting stuff to dig into, and really appreciate you being open about everything. If you are open to talking about it, I think it would be immensely helpful for many people, myself included, to learn more about orthorexia. That was the first time reading your article. That was the first time that I had heard that term. And so understanding more about it, I thought, wow, that is very interesting. And the reason I say it is that we are very conscious of, from a tech perspective, and I know you can appreciate this, having worked in tech, where tools can be used to do what you desire with them. So you can create really bad and unhealthy behavior patterns. Let's just say, let's make up an example. You have some game that like draws people in, and they're spending 20 hours a day on this game, and like that's really, I mean, it's really good interaction design as far as like you've figured out a way to get people to do the thing, but it's really bad because you're creating unhealthy relationship with like this thing that you've done. And so we're very conscious when we're creating the product to say, how do we create and surface healthy insights? How do we not turn this into a product that makes people feel? And I only bring this up because it comes up in a lot of the feedback sessions we do, where people feel almost a sense of sometimes being like afraid of food. Their relationship with food changes, where they think like, oh my gosh, I ate it doesn't matter because everyone's going to have a different response to everything. But for me personally, I ate a sweet potato. Oh my gosh, I could never eat this thing again. Right. And it's like, that is not the message we want to send. We want to send the message of, if you eat this thing, this is what happens in your body, and it's entirely okay to do things. You just have to understand how to balance it and what to pair it with. And so if you're open to talking more about it, I think there's a lot of learnings and a lot of insight that people could take away as far as how they can start to think about their relationship with food, and know that when you met your husband, it sounds like that was like a really interesting catalyst for change, to think differently, that like everything is okay within moderation. So if you're open to it, would love to dig into it.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up such an interesting point and something that has really taken me years to navigate. I don't think any of us go from having an unhealthy relationship with food to just overnight having a healthy relationship with food. I think it's quite frankly something that I will always sort of be working on for the rest of my life. And in so many ways, the experience that I had in terms of under eating and over exercising and cutting out certain food groups and reading everything that I read online as this very black and white, very dogmatic, has in so many ways actually given me perspective to come out on the other side. It was like I swung the pendulum so far in one direction. And looking back, I wasn't sleeping well. I had no energy. I was irritable. I was moody. My hair was falling out. I mean, there were so many physical symptoms that clearly what I was doing, even though I thought it was healthy, was so unhealthy. With orthorexia and with understanding that certain foods will spike our blood sugar more than others, it's so important to remember that we are all bio individuals. So what's going to cause you to spike isn't necessarily what's going to cause me to spike. But I also shouldn't be so concerned when my blood sugar does spike, because that is actually our body telling us, yes, you have energy. Now you can go use it. And it's also just been really important for me to remember where I was, what my mindset was a decade ago, realize how far I've come, and understand that I don't have to let diet culture really impact the food choices that I'm making. And when it comes to wearing a CGM, more than anything, it's just empowered me. And I think because I had such a unhealthy relationship with food, now when I see, my numbers spike a little bit, whether I'm eating sushi or a sweet potato or whatever it is, I know that I can do a couple things to balance my blood sugar, and it's not the end of the world by any means. Life is too short. We need to be able to enjoy the spontaneous ice cream cone, go out for sushi, and socialize, because food is, yes, it's 100% functional, it's fuel, it's medicine, but it's also spontaneity and it's culture and it's fun. And if we neglect all of those things and we only focus on the functional part of it, we're missing out on such an important part of food. So again, I just think that having an orthorexic background has given me really the empowerment to eat foods and see my blood sugar spike a little bit and not be so concerned about it, because I've actually healed my relationship with food. And I would rather have a healed relationship with food and see blood sugar spikes than be undernourishing myself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And orthorexia, we didn't define it, which again, the reason I bring it up is I'm not going to assume everyone knows this. I had no idea before that the term and the understanding of it, but it is the unhealthy relationship with healthy food, exercise. And so is it more, if you want to go into that, it's more along the lines of avoiding things that don't fall into the mental model. I guess that's also the thing too, is everyone's mental model of like what falls into, like it can get narrower and narrower, where a morsel of broccoli is like that is as far, that is my goalpost, is that, versus like some people might have wider goalposts. um and that's totally different than having this view that you have now, which is around balance.
I think with orthorexia, the definition is a bit broad, and everyone's, for those that do end up taking a more orthorexic approach to their food, it will look different. An example of this is, like, let's say, for example, we know that inflammatory oils like canola oil and soybean oil, these are not nourishing oils like avocado oil and coconut oil and olive oil, for example. So possibly someone with an orthorexic mindset would see anything with canola oil or soybean oil and avoid it completely. Like, let's say that they are starving, they haven't had anything to eat for 5 or 6 hours, and the only option is a granola bar with sugar and inflammatory oils. An orthorexic mindset would say, well, I'm not going to eat that because the ingredients are not clean enough for my standards. But a more nourishing approach would be, well, my body needs fuel. This is the only option. I'm going to eat it and move on with my day. And that's been the transition, or the progress that I've seen in my mind. And I help encourage with a lot of my clients too, because I often find that diet culture is really sneaky, and oftentimes it really manifests in these orthorexic tendencies. So I just try and encourage and empower my clients to understand micronutrients and macronutrients and ingredients that are more nourishing than others. But it's not to say that you can't ever eat the croissant, or have a granola bar that does have some inflammatory oils in it, because you're going to be just fine.
And it's confusing. It's overwhelming and confusing. One 1 minute, literally 1 minute, you look and you might be on, let's say you're searching the internet, assume the information is uh, relatively factual and relatively credible. Assume it's from a source like that. And you look at it and it says one thing, and then you're on, let's say there is an influencer, someone else that you trust, and you might be on some digital platform like Instagram, and there's some reel and you're looking at it and it's saying the complete opposite thing of what you just read. And so you're, in your mind, you're holding these two opposing views of like, I'm stuck. Like my feet are in the mud. I'm not sure what I have to do. And so it is very overwhelming, and it's hard to start to understand when people start to think about avoiding certain food, sure, there are certain foods that objectively, and I use the example all the time, I don't think there's a person in the world that will say like, yeah, eating Twinkies all day is good for you. It's just like there's
Right.
some foods that are objectively terrible and you should avoid, um, and avoid them with consistency. But there are other foods when people start to feel stuck of like, well, what about this? You brought up seed oils. Like, sure, there are certain things, but how stuck do you feel? It's more a matter of what do you buy? What do you expose yourself to? What do you have within your reach? And how do you start to create the conditions around you to eat a more balanced diet based on certain things? Good fats, good protein, good fiber, clean, non-refined carbohydrates. Like these are all things that are going to make people have a more balanced lifestyle and start to get back to things like balancing their glucose levels.
And ultimately, the hope is that when you start to navigate away from mostly eating processed foods, a lot of added sugar, possibly artificial colors, industrial seed oils, and you move more towards whole, unprocessed foods, fermented foods, quality protein, healthy fats, fairly quickly, you'll likely notice a difference in your body, in your energy, your sleep, possibly your joint pain and your inflammation. And that's what we want to chase. Overall, we want to feel good in our bodies. We want quality rest. We want to have the energy to chase our children and to perform well at work. And there can be a pretty significant difference when you transition away from some of those less nourishing foods to more nourishing foods that balance your blood sugar, because you actually notice a difference in your body and you're like, oh, I feel better. This is amazing. I want to eat more like this. Not to say that every once in a while I might have a, I don't know, Twix bar, whatever it is. But for the most part, what I'm fueling up on are ingredients that are satiating me and giving me energy and, of course, balancing blood sugar too.
So you were exposed to everything health and wellness related from your work day to day with clients, and sounds like one day you came across our good friend Kelly Levesque. Did
Yes.
other She was on a podcast, I believe, but walk us into that. So how did you hear about levels, and what was sort of the, I guess, that light bulb moment where you thought like, I should try this thing out?
Yeah, so it was Kelly LeVeque. I believe I heard her talking about levels on a podcast. And this was a couple years ago. So this was when you still needed to get on the wait list. So I signed up. And over the course of the couple of years following that, I started doing a lot more research. I got pregnant. Luckily, I didn't have gestational diabetes, but balancing my blood sugar became really important, just understanding the correlation between insulin resistance and PCOS. And so it was like everything in my orbit was blood sugar related. And like I said, when I heard Kelly talking about it, I was like, okay, I'm going to sign up for their wait list and see what happens. And then about 6 months ago, I wrote an article on my website about blood sugar and about CGMs and mentioned levels. And in April, I put on my first CGM. So I've been wearing one on and off for about 4 months now. And it's been remarkable. I think I learned actually the most amount just even in 1 month of wearing it. But even to this day, I don't have mine on at the moment, but I could tell you that after this call, if I were to check my blood sugar, it would probably be slightly elevated, because I know that stress and the adrenaline rush of having exciting conversations and passion-filled conversations does tend to make my blood sugar rise. But I feel so fortunate to have had the opportunity to wear a CGM and see how certain foods, but really also lifestyle too, impacts my blood sugar. I noticed that if I don't get a quality night's sleep, if I'm getting less than about 7 hours of sleep, I could be eating the exact same diet as the day prior, and my blood sugar response is going to be different. So that's where I'm at now. I've been wearing my CGM, like I said, on and off for about 4 months, and having the data has been incredibly empowering. I've also noticed that when I get sick, my blood sugar, my insulin sensitivity, I should say, is my glucose is not as sensitive, in other words. So when I get sick, as my body's trying to fight off some illness, some inflammation in my body, my blood sugar is chronically raised for a couple of days or a week long. And so instead of being frustrated by that, I can actually connect the dots, say, oh, well, I didn't get a good night's sleep, or oh, I'm sick right now, and that's what's causing my blood sugar to rise. I even notice a difference with my menstrual cycle too. And it's like I said, it's been super empowering. It's also helped guide my health coaching clients as well. I don't think there's a health coaching client at this point that I don't talk to them about my CGM and encourage them to try it out, even just for a month, because like I said, I learned so much just in 1 month of wearing levels. It's just been amazing.
Well, what was it like? So the box shows up at your door, like, and I asked because it's such a new experience for so many people, right? And there are all of these touch points that can create friction, naturally create friction for people. What is this thing? How does it work? Like we have these things in our, we sort of hold these questions in our head naturally because most people who would be outside of the type 1 and type 2 community have not used a CGM before. And so then you think about it and you're going to take this applicator and it's got a needle in it. And is this a needle in my arm? Is it a filament? How does this work? Do I take it off every night? Right? Like all of these things. So what was your experience like when that box showed up at your door and you started thinking through, like, you're about to apply it and then you get the first insight?
So, full transparency, I think it stayed in the box for maybe a week. I think one of my clients told me that she kept it in the box for over 2 weeks before she put it on because she was nervous, apprehensive. Who knows? But yeah, I think mine stayed in the box for about a week, and I was like, all right, it's time. I need to put this on my arm. And I was very nervous. It was going to be painful. I think my whole body was like tensing up as I was putting it on my arm. And then it barely felt like anything. And I was like, oh, okay. It just looks much more intimidating for anyone listening who isn't wearing a CGM, who possibly has theirs in a box at their house and is nervous it's going to hurt. I guarantee you it does not. But it does look intimidating. When I got that first insight, I'll never forget. So the day that I put it on, my husband and I and our toddler went to one of our favorite bakeries in Denver. I put it on in the afternoon while my son was napping, and then our favorite bakery closes at 4 p.m. here in Denver. So we went to go grab some iced teas and we split a cookie. And I was very curious to see what was going to happen with my blood sugar. But once we ate the cookie, we actually ended up walking to a local park. So it's not like I ate the cookie and sat there. But I was so pleasantly surprised when I checked my blood sugar an hour later that it pretty much was completely stable. And that was such an aha moment for me and a defining moment for me because of my past and because I have had a very dogmatic approach to food. I I ultimately saw that as an indicator that I can enjoy dessert. I can have a cookie. I can have, a slice of pie with friends at night and not be so worried about what it's going to do to my blood sugar. Again, it was such an I don't know, maybe serendipitous or I don't know, maybe it was a coincidence that I happened to just put it on a day that we went out to get cookies and I was able to see exactly what happened to my blood sugar. And it ultimately just gave me the reassurance that, oh, my body knows how to handle this, especially if we're going for a bit of a walk at our local park after and, got some movement. And ever since then, I've just essentially become very curious to see what certain foods do to my blood sugar. And I will tell you, 9 out of 10 times, I've been very, very pleasantly surprised by how my body's been able to handle what I'm eating.
Yeah, it's so funny because it's the opposite is feeling defeated. Like the sort of you're always behind. You can't quite, like, everything you eat. And we've heard this again. This is why we're working to make sure we're surfacing insights that allow people the now what. Like they see the so what, the data comes up, but the now what, how do you fix it? And so it feels defeating if all you're being told is like everything you eat is causing a spike of some kind. But when you can have that revelation of that first touch point being, hey, it's okay. And then because of your background, you're able to understand that, well, there's physical movement involved and there are all of these things that help to contribute. But that becomes a bit of an unlock to say, like, I can make things work. I just have to make sure that I understand all the implications. So curious if there were any ahas, like any real surprises where you thought, that's something I eat regularly, and you might have had a reaction that was maybe much more significant than you thought it would be. And I only ask because I think everyone that you talk to said, I had no idea that thing that I ate every day was doing that to me. You connect the dots and you go, but that's why I was like head nodding at the keyboard every afternoon at 2 p.m.
Exactly. So for me, a couple of things. I think that a, another aha moment for me was having a cooked and then cooled sweet potato. So for me, for my body, when I eat a cooked and cooled sweet potato, I actually have more of a glucose spike than if I just have a freshly baked sweet potato, which I know is the opposite for some people. So now it's not that I'm not going to eat a leftover sweet potato, but for the most part, if I am having leftover roasted vegetables, I aim for cauliflower and broccoli and zucchini and summer squash, more non starchy vegetables. Again, it's not to say that I don't ever eat sweet potatoes because I love sweet potatoes, but for the most part, I'm eating them when they're freshly baked. A couple other positive aha moments for me, realizing that if I get under about 20 grams of protein per meal, that A doesn't satiate me as much, and B does cause more of a blood sugar spike. So I typically will have eggs for lunch. It's easy, and I know that my body handles it well. It gives me the energy. But in the past couple of months, realized that that actually wasn't, and I didn't know this until I started wearing my continuous glucose monitor, that my blood sugar was spiking a little bit after that lunch. And I would typically eat it with either sourdough bread or I would have like a sprouted grain bread. Once I started adding in a couple slices of deli turkey, eating the exact same type of bread was actually causing less of a spike. So it made me realize that, oh, if I increase my protein, I can absolutely enjoy some refined carbohydrates with my lunch and not notice a spike. If I go out for a 10-minute walk after eating lunch, I essentially have very little spike at all. If I'm having, eggs and toast and avocado for lunch. Another really interesting insight for me has been the order in which I eat my food. So, for example, if we're having pasta for dinner and I start with pasta and then I eat a leafy green salad and maybe we're having some grilled chicken on the side, I have more of an elevated spike in my glucose than if I actually eat the greens and the fiber and the protein before the pasta. So, I think for me overall, there are certain aha moments that I've had that are very much in alignment with other people, and then certain things that are very bio individual to me, which makes sense. I know a lot of people are scared of this is going to sound outrageous for some people listening, but there are people out there who are scared of eating bananas because they think that they have too much sugar in them. Now, again, everyone is going to have a different response to bananas. For me, in my mind, I thought, well, I should only eat maybe half a banana at a time because, of course, I saw that on Instagram somewhere, what have you. And I've actually noticed that if I throw a full banana into a smoothie and there's plenty of seeds and healthy fats and protein and greens, and then maybe I go for a 10 to 15-minute walk after breakfast, again, my blood sugar stays very stable. And I wouldn't know any of these things without wearing a continuous glucose monitor. And now I just want to like shout these things from the rooftop because I just find it so fascinating.
Yeah, and it sounds like you pass a lot of this information along to your clients as well. And so, how has it been as far as being able to provide, although anecdotal because of bio individuality, but anecdotal examples of when I did this, this was the outcome. Being able to relate that to clients, like what's the reception been? Because I'd imagine that people will come from all different backgrounds and understanding. Some people might have a healthy foundation of knowledge coming in. Other people might have nothing, and they say, "Just tell me what to do." But it's hard to get people to start to change the behavior. And so, how has it been as far as being able to provide those personal anecdotes, and does it allow people to think through things on a more relatable level?
Absolutely. I'm very mindful to meet my clients where they're at when I'm giving them any type of information or education. If I have a client who I know is currently working through an eating disorder or has a past of disordered eating, I'm much more mindful of the way that I'm communicating blood sugar. So I probably wouldn't tell that person if I know that they are actively working on their eating disorder. I wouldn't tell them, A banana is probably going to spike your blood sugar. I would, recommend only eating a portion of it at a time, just like using that as an example. I wouldn't, I'm just very careful in the way that I word it. For someone like that, we start with the foundation. I explain blood sugar, I explain how to build a balanced plate, talk about carbs and fat and protein and fiber. For a client of mine who has more knowledge, has a greater understanding, has a better foundation of blood sugar, I can talk to that woman and explain, hey, when I ate this, this is what happened to my body. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen to your body, but just so that you understand, if you pair that banana with a handful of walnuts or with a hard boiled egg, you'll likely have less of a blood sugar response. It's also an opportunity for me to then encourage her to try a continuous glucose monitor for a month. But again, for the woman who is currently struggling through orthorexia, has an eating disorder, maybe she's not the ideal person to be wearing a continuous glucose monitor right now. It's not to say that she can't in the future, but that conversation is a bit different than what I'm having with a client who doesn't have those current circumstances, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine it's adapting to each individual situation and scenario and saying, how can you best support them, knowing that you're continuing to work down a path of like creating this foundation over time, as far as having the right knowledge, the right understanding, and the right tools at their disposal. Tools being whether they're actual tools or whether they're the choices that they make. But it's really about long-term behavior change as opposed to short term, if you want to call it gamification. Like it's relatively easy with the right incentives in place to get humans to do certain things. So if it was like, I challenge you for make some like odd example up for $10 million, you have to eat like only this thing for a week. It's like most people will do it. Like they're just gonna do it, but that doesn't actually enable the long-term behavior, right? So it's like giving these like arbitrary challenges, that's not helping anyone. People will, especially with like extrinsic motivators, people will find a way to game them, and they'll do them, especially if the window is short enough, then they're going to do that. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create long-term behavior change, the right foundation, so people can have a lens on health span and lifespan, not just, hey, I need to get healthy for this like short period of time.
Exactly. And that speaks so much to my brand as a whole, and just my mission is that I want wellness and health and well-being to be practical, and I want it to be sustainable. This isn't, working with me for 3 months. I'm not going to put you on a specific diet and that's what you need to adhere to for the rest of your life, because it's restrictive. It can cause deprivation. It can cause binge eating, yo-yo dieting, all of those things. And so what Levels is doing, and what you were just explaining again, is so much of the root of why I started Wellness with Edie, because I was seeing online, in order to be healthy, you need to take XYZ supplements, and you need to add all of these special adaptogens and powders to your smoothie in order to be healthy. And at the root of it, it's so much simpler than that. But the problem is that diet culture sells, diets sell, and people jump on that bandwagon because they're promised you'll lose 10 pounds and you will feel so much more vibrant and energized. And maybe you do, but did you actually learn certain habits and behaviors that are practical and sustainable moving forward? That's the missing piece. And that's where blood sugar comes in, because you can empower people to understand how to build a balanced plate and how to create habits and a lifestyle that help keep your glucose steady, not just for right now, but also for your longevity. And again, it just speaks to so much of why I started Wellness with Edie. And I am so proud to wear a continuous glucose monitor, because it just so aligns with what I'm trying to do, what my messaging is as well, for the women that I work with and the community that I've created on social media.
So if you're thinking about any changes that we can make to the product, to the experience, to anything, but being able to support members from all different backgrounds, what are some things that come to mind if you start thinking about whether it's making different products, making the current product more accessible, having more human interaction? What are some of the things that come to mind as far as the way that you would think about changing or evolving what we do with levels?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is when you initially open up the app, being able to select what your current understanding of blood sugar is. And I do believe that there is a prompt like that currently, but really helping guide customers on the path that is best suited for their current understanding of blood sugar. Because you can take it from a fairly high level perspective, but you could also get very nitty gritty for those that, have studied medicine and live and breathe blood sugar. And that's the beauty of levels is you can attract quite a broad spectrum of people. And it's a beautiful thing that, I don't have to have diabetes in order to wear it. And that's, I think one of the goals of levels that I would assume is like make this accessible for everyone, whether or not you're pre-diabetic or diabetic. But I do think that having different channels, if you will, for people who have, again, a moderate understanding of blood sugar, and then those that have a more complex understanding of it to make it more accessible. And I would also love to see definitely like more human interaction. I mean, even having this podcast is such a great supplement to the app as well. I find that your newsletter is so informative. The blog posts are incredibly informative. There's such a wealth of information. But if I was brand new to blood sugar and had really no idea about it and just sort of stumbled upon it, or maybe my doctor told me, hey, based off of your A1C, you're pre diabetic. I do a Google search, I find levels. It's like, boom, there's so much information to delve through. So giving people just an opportunity to take it at the pace that they need to so that they can understand the foundation and then sort of progress on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. One of the things that we have to work on, which I'm curious to hear more about your perspective, is we'll call it the box at the door. Why don't we air quotes box at the door or box on the table where it sits there for a week or some n number of days or months in some cases. What was the feeling? Like, what was the reason that you personally let it sit there? And then even people whom you know that have used it, their reasoning for letting it sit there. Because if we make a product, assume we make a product and we have all these great partners like Kelly and Tim Ferriss now, Andrew Huberman, all these great people that are helping to bring more awareness, but the box goes to the door, it sits on the table, then like that doesn't matter. It's not actually helping people. It's not about getting people to buy it. It's about getting people to make meaningful change. So we'd love to hear more about the idea of it sitting on the table and what some of the feelings were around um, maybe not wanting to put it on. Was it the fear of the new experience? Was it the idea that it's like, oh, this is going to be high friction and take me more than 5 minutes?
It was certainly in part the high friction. I knew I needed to download two apps, and I wasn't entirely sure how they were going to sync together. Plus, if you get any new, I don't know what an example of this would be. Not, I'm looking at my AirPod case, but that requires Bluetooth and syncing. And we get any new device, and it's like that friction of, well, I need to set it up. And we can think about a million other things that we could be doing with our time. And then we go off and we choose those things and the box sits there. So I think in part it was the friction. I think the other thing for me too, specifically, was I didn't know at the time anyone else in my immediate circle who was wearing a continuous glucose monitor. So I knew about, Kelly wearing it, for example. I think that for me, because she is such a role model and someone who has paved such a path in the blood sugar space for women, but it almost felt, I don't want to say inaccessible, but you feel that way sometimes with like celebrities or pseudo
Hmm.
celebrities, if you will. I think because I didn't know anyone in my, like I said, immediate circle wearing it, it felt a bit intimidating. And that in part is why I have the conversation with my clients. I share about it on social media because I want to show, like, hey, I'm a mom. I recovered from PCOS. I live a relatively, active and normal lifestyle, and I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor to like make it more relatable. I think that in part, again, it was the friction, but I also felt like a little bit nervous because I didn't know anyone in my immediate circle wearing one. So yeah.
Yeah, it feels at first, it feels like you especially when we had the wait list, you're, an insider to this thing that it's gated and it's hard to get access to, and so we laugh, we call it levels or we still do call it levels in the wild, but when different team members will be in different cities, whether it's Denver or Bend, Oregon, but you say levels in the wild, you see somebody's wearing the performance cover over the CGM, and it still sort of makes everybody's ears and eyes perk up, and they say,
Well,
"Wow."
and it's funny you say that because we were in the Bay Area visiting my family a couple months ago, and there was a woman walking down my parents' street, and she was wearing a Levels glucose monitor. And we were walking towards each other, and she had her AirPods in as well. And I noticed that she was wearing it, and so I had this moment of like, I should say something to her. So of course I started walking in her direction, and I was like, "Oh, I wear the Levels continuous glucose monitor too." And it was so amazing to have that first moment of like Levels in the wild. And now my husband will actually say he works in downtown Denver and spends, quite a bit of time downtown walking around, and he said he's starting to notice people wearing it as well. And I love that. I love that there's this growing community of people, of the awareness, so that hopefully that alleviates some of that friction around, well, I don't know anyone else wearing this. I see celebrities wearing it and top tier doctors talking about it and wearing it, but that doesn't feel totally relatable for my life. But if you just see the average person wearing it, it gives you that much more encouragement, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, it's such a cool touch point. The idea of the nod. Certain things have the nod where it'll be uh, the anyone who owns a Tesla gives the wave. Anyone who owns, if you're into Jeep Wranglers, gives the wave. The
Yep.
Corvette wave. Like, and I'm using car analogies, but very much like um, we always use this quote internally from Seth Godin, and he says, "People like us do things like this," and you sort of find the others. You find people that you can have this common connection with, and it gives you a starting point to say, "Hey, like you care about this thing, and so do I." And it's such a interesting thing that a small visual cue can open up the opportunity to have these conversations, and next thing you know, you're talking with someone for like 20 minutes.
Totally.
It's
And
very cool.
it is, and it's such a ripple effect too. Everything worth changing someone's life starts as a small seed. It starts as one person realizing this could be a game changer. And then you have to convince a circle of people around you. And then those people convince other people. And then all of a sudden it's this like global phenomenon, right? But that doesn't happen overnight. And to have that ripple effect, see that domino effect of people wearing it, and now having that conversation, nodding, whatever it is, it's super empowering. And it makes me so excited too, because it's changed my life and it's changing my clients' lives. And I hope it's also changing the small community of followers that I have on social media and on my newsletter, just to empower people. I ultimately just want people to feel better in their bodies, feel more energized, better sleep, um, you know, more stable mood, better sex drive. I mean, all of these things that we all want, right? Um, and in so many ways, it all comes back to blood sugar. And I just want to be able to teach people that.